of the trees regarding our gender identity and sexuality. When there's no place like home, empty air, an empty establishment. Friends with Dorothy, fighting for your civil rights. Out on the cruel streets tonight.
Thanks, Eamon. I'm going to ask the three of you to give us some shorter answers just for the rest of the panel to make sure that we can get a good bit of Q&A. But thanks so much for everything you shared. And I think it's so interesting because I work with a charity called Shout Out, and we go to schools and speak to young people, LGBT and not LGBT. As you say, there's unfortunately only one word for not LGBT. And the younger people, I find, they want queer characters such as the ones who are in Heartstopper, a wonderful show on Netflix, where they're just queer, and there doesn't have to be a big coming out story, there doesn't have to be the heartbreak and the suffering that often comes with the LGBT experience. They're just queer, and that just blends into the other facets of their characters. So there's this debate, I find, in our community maybe, or maybe we all want a bit of both, to reflect our experiences accurately, but equally not to always be that same gay character. Oh, the poor camp guy who has to come out and never has a partner, and these specific characters that are sometimes tied to minority communities. So it's an interesting, I think it'll be interesting to see the future of literature in this regard. Mary, I might ask you two-pronged questions to make sure we cover a few bases. Looking back, specifically for writers now, because we've spoken a lot about the context of Ireland, I suppose, maybe 30 years ago when homosexuality was decriminalised, but specifically for writers and writers looking to be published. You've spoken a bit about it. Could you talk to us a bit about that time, 1993, and then maybe if anyone is listening today, bring it right up to today, what tips that you might have for anybody who could be LGBT who's joined us or joined us online and listening back, who would like to be published.
Sorry, what about the 90s and 1993?
Looking back to how things were then, could you tell us a little bit more about that time for LGBT writers?
Oh, I don't think there was any. I mean, there was no possibility of getting published in Ireland as an LGBT writer, and the prejudice was so intense and showed itself in so many ways. And I'm just remembering various things that I had gladly forgotten. And one was when Biography of Desire came out, which is a very passionate lesbian relationship story, and it doesn't deal with a huge amount of guilt and the difficulty of coming out. It's about the difficulty of people being in love with one another, And I was twice invited onto the Late Late Show for an interview in Gay Brown's day, and I had been interviewed by Gay Brown a couple of times on the radio, and he was actually very nice to me, so I had no problem with gay. But a researcher came out to talk to me, and I knew her and I trusted her. She's a straight woman but a feminist, and she said, she was on the research panel. They have to get together and talk about it. And she said, Mary, I think I'd just like to warn you that, we've been going through the questions today that you would be asked live on television, and one of them is there a special kudos in the lesbian world for bringing down a married woman? So that immediately gave me the sense of where this was going, And that's how it was. It was almost impossible. Either it was silenced completely, or they just dug the dirt, what they thought was the dirt, and went for something shocking. And now I just give the example of Sally Rooney's book, which is just one of many. And I'm only mentioning it not because holding Sally Rooney to account so much as publishers, that now the thing is, it's just a little frill around other things, it just gives a bit of excitement. Just stick a lesbian in and it just suggests, this is cool, this is 21st century. And that's something else we have to watch for, that our real lives will be as hidden as ever, but we'll be getting these little tags that make us feel we're included. What was the question?
I think you answered it. And beyond that, Mary, or any of the panel, any tips or kind of guidance for LGBT writers today? I know, Eamon, we spoke a lot about sort of the challenges and the challenges being published now in 2023. Is there anything that ye have learned that you would impart as wisdom to anyone who's...
As far as that goes, Catherine O'Donnell would be much more up to date with this, because I've been, as you know, publishing poetry for years, and poetry is a different world. It's a wonderful world. Nobody cares what your background is in poetry or what you're writing about, because, oh, Jesus, poetry, you know. So people who want to read poetry are very grown up and they're ready for anything, you know. They don't have these narrow little rails around everything they do, and you don't have to declare your subject before. And it doesn't get a lot of reviewing in mainstream magazines and journals and papers and so on. So it's a lovely world where you can be whatever you want to be.
It is, but I can't help wondering if we start in the wrong place. We go away into our eyrie and we write our work, and then we go out for trying to find someone to take it seriously. And I think, for whatever reason, the world has changed now, and I would advise any young person or people who are considering writing a novel is to join as many classes and as many groups as you can. Apply to the Arts Council for personal funding. If there's retreats and stuff like that, go on them. Join the smaller magazines that are looking for fiction or poetry, and get yourself a name. Get involved with the Irish Writers Centre, and just, you have to enter the world. It's a career, and you have to start at the bottom as an apprentice and listen to people lecturing you for years and ignoring you for years. And then when you're 72, you'll have your first novel published.
I almost feel we should end the panel there.
Oh, right. Actually, thanks. I agree with everything Anna was saying. And just, again, your point, to make connection, to engage. I just watched one publisher on how to get published, and her whole point was you have to be engaged. Show you are engaged, and people are engaged with you via social media, via whatever form it takes. And I just want to put a pitch for Pride Poets, which happens in Street 66 on the last Tuesday of every month. Really open. It is poets mostly, but as a writer myself, I just love being there, because it's being part of community is what it is. It's a community of writers and poets, and it's so encouraging and supportive. It's one example of a really great context.
Great, thank you. And I'm part of a queer Irish language arts collective, if anyone would like to chat about that afterwards. Come and chat to us. Exactly. And it's just the most wonderful, beautiful thing, because I think for a long time people associated the Irish language with something conservative, with old Ireland, let's say, and we're now writing about queer sex, the trans experience, all sorts of things. We're putting on plays in the Abbey, things like that, through Irish about being LGBTQ. So there's certainly groups out there for everybody. We've talked about bookshops and publishing. I'd like to talk a little bit about libraries. So whichever of you would like to kind of address this. We've seen queer texts being removed from libraries. We've seen far-right groups being escorted into libraries by Garda Síochána. What is the importance of libraries in all of this? I think we're really tying LGBT books to the LGBT experience and how important it is to be represented. And again, that phrase of you can't be what you can't see. Would any of you like to speak to the importance of libraries and libraries housing our books and proudly showing our books, not just in June or during the summer, but having that LGBT section, so that perhaps when young people are searching and trying to learn, that they'll have those books to go to, and that won't become something that's so negative and that's associated with something vulgar.
I haven't an awful lot to say, except that I've earned almost no money from the sale of my novel, but I've almost earned more from library viewings than from sales in bookshops. So definitely you should try to get them into libraries. I think the anonymity, well, yeah, I don't know what I feel about shelves. Every bookshop seems, or most bookshops, with the exception of Books Upstairs, I think, has done away with exclusive displays. They used to have them in all the bookshops, well, and certainly in London, in Borders and stuff like that, you'd have them. but they seem to have gone. And I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's much more difficult to find stuff if they're not there, if they're not in a specialist area. But yeah, I'm not sure I have much more to say. I think libraries are terribly important, and we should be using them more.
Can I just come back on what Ger was saying? Because yes, it's true that things have changed enormously in a positive way too, that there are so many outlets than ever were before. And there are workshops and there are residencies where you can go, and there's so many out people and so many also friendly booksellers. You know, if you go into places like Books Upstairs, there's so many places where you can get support and get help and get advice. But ultimately the only advice you can give a writer is to just write, to just go somewhere quiet and write, you know, and try and tell the truest thing you can tell with fear of nobody. Just say, if this was the last thing I was ever to write, this is what I'm going to write. If I was going to be dead when this book was finished, this is what I was going to write. And that's how you write. And then you start looking for a publisher. But if you don't do that basic, from the gut writing, like it's the last statement you're going to make, and fuck a lot of them, you know, but you're going to say it, and you're going to say it as well as you can. And you just have to keep writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. That's all there is to it.
Mary.
Thanks, Mary. And I think the organisers are allowing us till 5:15. Are we? Yeah, is that still okay? So I'm just going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to come to yourselves for some questions if any of you have anything you'd like to share or ask the panel. Just a final point, and if any of you would like to address this, the future of LGBTQ plus publishing, so publishing of writers and the representation of characters, and I think we talked a bit about that and how that's really evolving, and we need to watch what happens there. Any thoughts and hopes and expectations for the future?
I did speak a little bit about that because of the expansion that we're seeing all around us. Obviously there's still missing voices, that would be, trans would still be very minimal, and intersex just going is another one I don't know about. I predict there might be some they and use of pronouns is going to become something that's open to discussion. I can't wait for that discussion. I've tried several times to write using they and ze and zay and all kinds of things, and it's actually really difficult. So I hope the future, you know, will just push all the boundaries. But I still think we're left with what Mary talked about, and myself and Eamon, that, you know, what is representation? What are we going to see? And we're going to see huge diversity. That's the answer. But to your point about visibility, I think visibility, it's up to us to maintain visibility, I think, as LGBTQ, as queer writers, and as with allies, to keep that concept on the agenda, to not get it lost in the whole diversity understanding. And even on the point of libraries, to go to libraries and ask for books and be actively engaging as a reader as well as a writer, and to make sure that, because at the end of the day it's market. I mean, publishers are commercial enterprise. I totally understand that. I don't blame them. They have to cover their costs and ideally make money. They have to do that. So that is their mandate, and we're part of that in terms of being consumers. So engagement, I think, is where we have to keep keep involved. Yeah.
Okay, we've mentioned Catherine O'Donnell, not to point you out, Catherine, but Catherine, if you haven't heard of her, book was only published in May 2023. I think we should give her a round of applause. And it's a novel entitled Slant, if you want to keep an eye out for it, in bookshops and libraries. And Catherine's also a professor of philosophy, specifically on the history of ideas, and she has also been a queer and feminist activist for many years. There's such a crossover between feminism and queer activism. Catherine, can I ask you to maybe kick off the Q&A, and then we'll come to anybody else who'd like to comment or ask questions, a bit about your own experiences as a queer writer, and about maybe the crossover between writing about LGBTQ plus experiences, activism, philosophy, some of the things we've touched on. I wonder, do we have a mic for Catherine, or will I pass her my one?
Maybe this one here.
This one working?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Ger.
Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks very much for the shout out. And yeah, it's lovely to be nearly on the panel with Ger and Eamon and Mary. And even though I'm only a little bit younger than you guys, thank you. Thank you. So yeah, I mean, one of the things we haven't perhaps mentioned is luck. and I was lucky. So I'm, like many people here, addicted to writing. It's something I just need to do, so I've always done it. I've only ever circulated what I've written, which is generally short stories. I'm one of these chauvinists who think short stories are where it's at, among friends. And I had burnout in 2016, and I had 3 short stories that I couldn't finish because I was just so shattered and exhausted. And they rolled into this awful thing, a novel, this baggy creature that I'd never attempted to do before. And when I was done with it, I did my usual and showed it to friends. And one of them, cheeky, decades younger than me, sent it to New Island Press. So I'm an accidental published author. And I was lucky. You know, New Island Press are really young people. They're supported by the Arts Council because they're quasi-commercial in that way. They can actually afford to test markets, which is an incredible stroke of luck for me and Declan Toohey. And so they took a chance on both of us. And when the novel was, when I was redrafting the novel and I'd agreed, okay, this is going to go out into the world, instead of just writing it for me and my friends, I had to think, therefore, this is actually going to be really in the world. And it might sound strange, but that's what I needed to do in order to send it out into the world. I needed to think, who am I hoping will read this? So that's what helped in the last version, where it did change quite a bit in key ways. Because I work as an academic, like Ger, I write everything for my students. So it was for my students, particularly the queer students, but actually for that younger generation who do see that their queer peers have a story that's universal. So they're both interested in our particularity and how we're different. They're curious about that, and also they think that there's going to be connection and important things for them to learn about life in general, love in general, humanity in general, from our experience. So that was amazing. It was amazing to be able to keep a very specific historical story about a queer life over 3 or 4 decades, and to have it picked up, because I'm now getting emails from those former students to say how much they resonated with it. So all of that is luck. So I don't think I'm actually somebody who can contribute much to this discussion. I think what Eamon said around taking yourself seriously as a writer is something I kind of didn't do, but is actually it is crucial. So taking yourself seriously as a writer who has things to say publicly, networking, getting the advice, building up your profile, going to all of the amazing outlets we now have in this country and other countries, not every country of course, to announce your voice is something that I think ought to be done if one is going to take oneself seriously and get published. So I'm one of these fluky people who was always writing but never published.
It was written a cracking book.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, so that, will I write any more? I might revise some I've already written, but yeah, I'll certainly keep writing. It is a very strange, weird addiction, isn't it? This writing thing, to always be in. I thought until I was about 18 or 19, I thought every single person in the world was going around composing a story. It wasn't until I was in my second year in undergrad, I realised that even though I was studying English Lit, that most of my peers weren't in the world in that way. So, yes, take yourself seriously as a writer and try and get published, but also cherish the fact that that's how you are in the world. You're in the world as a storyteller, as somebody who's trying to kind of find that story in ether and bring it down through your body into the world. It doesn't matter in some ways. I can easily say that because I've got a nice job, but it kind of doesn't matter if nobody reads it. It's what we have to do. That's who we are. We're the people who are alive to stories in the world and who are using our amazing brief time on this planet to try and translate the experience of the world into stories as gifts for others. And keep going, people. We've got a very special way of being in the world, and let's cherish each other and cherish our gift. So thank you.
Really inspiring end to the panel. Does anybody have any other questions or comments?
Sorry, could I just ask Catherine one question, just because you mentioned the wonderful people. Is Dermot Bulger still running New Island?
He's still the vision and the kind of creative person behind it.
But he's not the day-to-day person.
Not the day-to-day, yeah. But
Congratulations,
amazing young
anyway.
people in there now. Yeah.
Questions there? Yeah.
Just to say, Irish Writers Union were part of the counter-protest at Cork Library a couple of weeks ago, which is part of our whole policy of inclusivity for all members. And we think it's very, very important to stand up to that kind of behaviour. I live part of the year in Texas. In Texas, currently there are 801 books banned by school educators. And we can't allow that to start happening here. So just so you know. The IWU is standing up for writers, libraries, access to books and access to information.
Thank you, yeah. And I think we need all writers as well to be part of that. We don't want to go back to an Ireland of censorship that we had for so long. And it's also illegal to be a performing drag queen in Texas at the moment. So that's how far back we are going. The other questions are?
What's the, now that it's quite democratic, you can self-publish. What are the opportunities in self-publishing?
Interesting. We had that on our list. We didn't get to it, so thanks for asking. Self-publishing. Any thoughts on self-publishing, or what are the opportunities there?
I'm sure people are familiar with this, but first of all, it's changing status. It was always, well, you only self-published if you couldn't, but actually there's more and more people self-publishing, and for all kinds of reasons. And in fact, the head of the Arts Council, his name I forget, in a recent talk said specifically, well, self-publishing is very important, we have to acknowledge this now.
Helicopters just coming in.
Oh, sorry. I won't say too much, but just to say, one of the big reasons people self-publish is to do with time. They want it out now. They don't want to wait, for going around to publishers, waiting for response, all of that, going through the editorial process, all of that. So, and what I'm trying to say is that self-publishing status is changing. That's the first thing, and it is going to be on the agenda now. There's also hybrid publishing, which is publishers that offer they will partner you, and you pay for some of it and they pay for some of it, and some of it they do themselves, and then there's the traditional publishing. So there's self-publishing, hybrid publishing, traditional. Everything boils down to marketing, and you have to market whether you're self-published or published by a publisher. I self-published a book of my father's, actually, that's why I know. There's all kinds of opportunities out there. There's websites, companies. Companies will handle everything from printing to editing to typesetting to the cover to, they will then add on, if you want, editing of all kinds, marketing, PR. They will do everything that a publisher does. They won't have the same contacts. I think that's the big thing that is still a huge issue, which is the established publishers obviously have contacts in bookstores and for reviewing and all of that. But I suppose my point would be, if it's something you're interested in doing, it's a matter of paying somebody to do it, and of course making sure your book's up to the standard.
There is the independent Alliance, which is very good and helpful, and they've got lots of courses and guidance on how to self-publish and how to market and pitfalls and things to avoid there. And it's founded by an Irish woman who's very helpful and sympathetic.
Thanks, Eamon. Question there, yeah?
Nothing has really changed, because as a gay author, I got very little access success, but that's fine. I'm okay with it. I'm exploring new routes. But what I noticed in the last 2 or 3 years is something that I want to ask you, what you think about cultural appropriation, where you mentioned Heartstopper, but also Red, White, and Royal Blue, both bestsellers written by straight white women, where as a gay man, I struggle to get that message out. Now, beautiful books, read them both, but you can see they don't really talk to gay people, gay men, as much as other authors, opposite sex, that are not part of the community, would feel the same.
What would you like to say on that? I know we've touched on it, and thanks so much, Ross, for sharing. And we all have different opinions on this. We should be very clear. The queer people do not have the same opinion on everything. Sometimes that's an
We did talk about, I think we might be in agreement, and you know, censorship is the last thing we want. So it's not about shutting it down, but it has to be about discussion and public discussion, and we have to participate in that, I think,
Access.
in terms of what we have to say about seeing that kind of, that kind of appropriation, and generally commentary, and maybe we need more to think more about our own role as critics and commentators in the Irish, just talking about the Irish context, to be able to raise these kinds of conversations and ask questions, because I don't think a lot of people would think about it particularly. If they read a book with a gay character, whoever it might be, I don't think they think particularly often how real is this, or how much does it represent what's on the ground, or in that case, for example, is the character having a relationship? There's a lot of critical questions we can ask about this kind of thing, which may become more and more common. In other words, what kind of representation is happening in this book or this set of books, and what have we got to say about it?
I'd just like to say that, you know, very often on this subject people will say, well, what do gay people know about heterosexuals? The really, really extreme difference is we're all brought up by heterosexuals, you know, all our parents are heterosexual. If we're here, our parents were heterosexual, at least for a night or two. Oh, for a night or two, yes. They may change afterwards, right? So we're all brought up, we're surrounded by heterosexuals, and brothers and sisters who are heterosexual, and the majority of the population, and many of our best friends and the people we love are heterosexual. Whereas for heterosexual people, how much do they know about gay people? Very often if they decide to write a book about gay people, it's because they've met one gay person. They have one gay friend and they think, oh right, I know about gay people. So that's a difference that we have to bear in mind. I mean, it's, how do heterosexual people learn about being gay? Not easy. If you're not attracted to your own sex, how are you really going to know anything about it?
I suppose in the broader context, in the arts, it's increasingly happening that where in filming, where there's a disabled character, people are pressuring for disabled actors to play the part rather than have somebody without a disability play the part and mimic them. And we'd be outraged if Othello was played by a white person. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a couple of books which caused outrage in the States. Jean Cummings with American Dirt, which was about a Mexican family traveling over the border into the US. When there were story, which is written by an American with an Irish husband, and The Help by Catherine Stockett, people were outraged that this was a white woman writing about her black staff in southern states of this. So I think cultural appropriation is there. I think it's a very real issue, and I don't think we should be ignoring it. I'm not sure that we have the power to control it. It's in the hands of the publishers. And as I say, Catherine Stockett's book was published at a time when there were genuine Mexican immigrants writing their story, and they couldn't get published. But Catherine is a name, and so they took it.
Thanks, Eamon, and we've already overstayed our welcome, so I would invite, if anyone else has questions or comments, please do come and talk to us, particularly Ross. Maybe come and pick the brains of our panel members, and hopefully they can help you with your journey on writing. And thanks to everybody who contributed. Thanks especially to the International Dublin Writers Festival for allowing us to have this space, and an hour, actually a little bit over an hour of their time. It's been really great, and I'm sure not everybody in the room is LGBT, so we really appreciate you all being part of the conversation and listening. Thanks especially to Lawrence O'Brien for having us, and I think we'll leave it there. Ger Moane, agus
Couldn't see the haunted forest for the trees regarding our gender identity and sexuality. When there's no place like home, empty air, an empty establishment. Friends with Dorothy, fighting for your civil rights.